G'day, and thanks for stopping by at the eCave today. This is a bit of an update on where I am at with the PS2 Model 30 286 machine from the first episode. I haven't made a lot of progress, but why not join me and I'll tell you about it. Well, thanks for stepping into the eCave today. I'm sure you're interested to hear about where I'm at. I've got here the second PS2 Model 30 286 machine, and it is running a memory test, i.e. the Mem Test 86. As you'll see here up on the screen as well, I'm capturing it. It's actually been running since yesterday afternoon, and it hasn't failed yet. This is Mem Test 86 version 4.00. That's the earliest version I can get to run on these machines. If I try a later version like 4.3, it simply crashes. The memory I'm testing are the two modules, i.e. the standard modules, I modified in order to work in the machine. So it's testing 2 megabytes of memory. Why am I doing that? Well, first when I powered it on, it behaved very strangely. I just couldn't believe what was happening. Every time I powered it on, it would start counting up the memory and then perhaps stop and do nothing, like after 128K. Sometimes it would continue, and sometimes it would show these strange characters on the screen as well, which in some way point to the VGA RAM, but I didn't believe that. And after some head scratching and looking at the memory errors and corruption, I sort of gradually came to the conclusion that perhaps there was something wrong with the BIOS chip, i.e. the data in the BIOS. So I took the BIOS chip out, put it into my EEPROM programmer and read the data. And surprise, surprise, after having read it 2 or 3 times, I compared the bin files and they were different. So there was something wrong and not right. In the end, in order to progress with this machine, I actually stole the BIOS ROM out of the first machine, which, by the way, is still dead. I haven't received the CPU yet, so I can't progress that, or I don't want to progress that until I have a new CPU. You could waste a lot of time trying to diagnose something and then put in a new CPU and everything's fine. I'd rather wait. I didn't want to put the CPU from that machine into this one, or the accelerator board, which this one seems to have, the 3866 board, into the first machine. I just don't like mixing up parts and ending up with a confusing situation. So I also decided to test the original 4 30-pin SIM IBM modules in my retro chip tester. I'll show you how that went. Here I have the 4 IBM 30-pin SIM modules from the first PS2 machine, which constantly failed memory, and I'm testing them in the Retro Pro tester because they're 1 megabyte modules, which is the maximum this tester can test. I can put them in here. There's a separate SIM30 parity IBM SIM module tester, and let's start that. And it goes away and tests. Now the other three have all failed. The one in there now is the same as this one here with the 5 modules, but the other two, they've failed as well. I've sort of noted down the failure. Now I've tested them 2 or 3 times and they fail consistently, sometimes in, like the first one, always in the same spot, the second one in 2 spots, and the third one in 2 spots. And I'm guessing this one will fail as well, because if I put them into the second PS2 Model 30, it crashes out with memory errors. Even if I just put 2 of them and then the other 2, doesn't matter, it crashes out all the time. So I suspect they are faulty, sadly. So the ones I've made up seem to work, as I've said. Yes, the test on this SIM module has just finished, and as you can see, test failed. And now it says address 3, it expected 1 but got 0. And that's how these modules fail all the time. So I'm having to write them off. The alternative is to source chips and replace, but I don't know if it's doable to get these IC chips. But we'll see. I do have some spares still. I've got at least 2 I can modify. And I might run with that. However, after I put the modified standard ROM card, SIM card into this machine, it just kept coming up with errors. And that's why I'm testing it. It's strange. I power it on. I then actually see RAM errors, just random memory errors. I power it off, wait a bit, RAM errors. And suddenly when it powers on, counts up the memory and boots, everything suddenly is fine. And it's been doing that since yesterday, running this MEM86 test, or MEM test 86. So I'm not sure what's happening. It's a bit moody, I must say. Now, I'll tell you a bit about the diskette drives. I've come to the conclusion that I actually had fixed the diskette drives because I had taken them apart and replaced surface mount capacitors, as I showed you in the first episode, and fired it up, and I was testing it in this machine, but once again it never booted from the diskette drive, and I now suspect that was due to the corruption in the BIOS chip. Because now with the BIOS from the first machine, that seems to be rock solid, I can boot the diskette drive. And in fact, this diskette drive is the one that was on the first machine. It's working fine. And I booted the memtest floppy from that. So it's good. I tested the second diskette drive from this machine, and that's working fine as well. I did have to replace a capacitor on that too. The third one, I finally got JB Weld And I've glued the plastic together, and it's been drying out for the last 24 hours. But I'm not so sure it would hold. There's a lot of stress on that plastic piece, and I'm just wondering how I can reinforce it a bit. The problem with that is it's a very tight space. I've got to analyze it mechanically how it works, because it's got this tab that seems to hold the sled with a diskette. So I'll probably tell you what happens if I manage to fix that. And if I manage to fix that, then all 3 diskette drives are all good and work in the PS2 machines. But I'll turn this machine off, and I'll show you. Hopefully it will boot up properly, because I put the XT IDE compact flash card into it, and that seems to work fine, or almost 100%. And I'll tell you about what doesn't work. But let's first power it off, power it on again, and see if it boots up from the XT IDE compact flash card. And while I remember, the switch settings are set to IO port 300, and the ROM address is D0000. So let's power it off. Wait a bit, take out the floppy so we're not booting into the MEN test 86. And I hope the RAM behaves. And if everything goes well, it should boot up from the compact flash card. It's whinging a bit. I don't think any configuration has changed, but it's complaining about the monitor because I've got a splitter cable. That's not good. And there you see it. It's booting up, and I've got it running off the compact flash card. And this works fine. We'll go into sysinfo 8. And it runs. And let's do the benchmark. CPU speed. And as you can see, it's seeing a 8386SX 20 megahertz CPU, which is this upgraded CPU board in the machine. But once I cold boot it up, and it runs off the XT IDE compact flash card, it works fine. Everything works fine. However, one of the issues I have, if I warm boot it, i.e. the famous Control-Alt-Delete, it hangs when it tries to boot from the compact flash card. Now, I'm running DOS version 3.3 on the compact flash card. I don't know if that's the issue, but I'll need to upgrade to a later version of DOS and see if that makes any difference. Yep, I know you're unhappy about the wide cable. So it definitely sees the compact flash card, and it says it's booting, but this is where it hangs. I'm not sure why it does that, but if I power it off and on again, it works fine. I'll have to dig a bit better into this. Well, I've spent a bit more time on this, and I think I've cracked it. The issue with the memory got resolved, thankfully. I received a couple of new CPUs in the post, which I had ordered for the first PS2 machine. I obviously haven't had time to tinker with that yet, but the errors I was getting on this machine all pointed to the fact that the memory was fine, but something else was happening. And I suspected that this accelerator board that was installed in the machine might be the cause. And with the new CPU, it's perfect. So after having taken out this board and put that CPU in, standard 10 megahertz original CPU, which these machines came with, no memory errors, and the compact flash card problem has disappeared as well, which is excellent. This actually allowed me to install PC-DOS 6.3 onto the compact flash card, and now it's working as it should. If I boot up, cold boot up, it works fine. If I do Control-Alt-Delete, it works fine. So let me show you. The other thing I've cracked is the 2401 error, which points to the display or the motherboard. The problem with that has to do with the fact that there's circuitry in the machine on the motherboard monitoring the signal levels of the analog signals, i.e. red, green and blue. So I'll show you a schematic of that. But let me first show you DOS 6.3. It jumps into the DOS shell. Yep, there it is. I can see it here on the capture device. Now the reason for 2401 is the fact that when you use like a Y cable here, the signal level of the red, green and blue analog outputs drops, because the normal impedance for the red, green and blue input on a monitor is around 80 ohms. And now you parallel connected too. And normally a PC wouldn't worry about it, because normally they don't monitor the output signal. But IBM, in their infinite wisdom, built a feedback circuit into their motherboard, which monitors the RGB levels, and if they fall below a certain threshold, they generate this error. As you can see here on the schematic diagram, there's a tap off for RGB into a comparator, and that line is then fed back into the VGA chip, which is a custom IBM chip. So bear that in mind. If you get 2401 errors, it might be the fact that the level of the analog signal is low, especially on these PS2s. Now I'm happy. This one is working now flawlessly. I just have to clean it up a bit and put the covers on. And then I have to focus on the first PS2 machine, which is dead now that I have the CPU. However, that will have to wait a bit, because as I mentioned, I stole the BIOS ROM chip from that machine and I'm using it in this one. So I need another EEPROM, which is in the post, and once I get that, I should be able to get that diagnosed to see if I can resurrect it. The other thing I haven't mentioned is the fact that the standard 30-pin SIM modules I've modified. They're actually 2 meg modules, but if you put them into the SIM slot on this machine, it only reads the first megabyte, not 2 megabytes, because you can only have maximum 1 megabyte per slot and 4 megabytes in total, which is a bit of a problem, but anyway, you can always put expansion cards into it. So now that I've cracked this one, I've got to crack the first one. And once I've got that done, I'll have to pull out the third PS2 286 machine, which has the old planer. But that will have to come a bit later. So, thank you very much for stepping into the eCave today.